She walked out of that hospital believing she finally had everything. She walked back in bleeding, childless, and destroyed by the one man she gave up everything to love. Charlotte Whitmore thought the hardest part of her life was behind her. At 27, she had the career, the marriage, the loyalty, and now, finally, the baby she had been waiting years for. But the moment she stepped outside that hospital with an ultrasound photo pressed against her chest, her entire world detonated. The man she built from nothing was helping another woman, pregnant, glowing, cherished, into a car that Charlotte paid for. Drop a comment with your city and follow so you never miss what happens next. Hit that like button and let's see how far this story travels. The ultrasound photo was still warm from the printer. Charlotte held it against her chest as she pushed through the hospital's revolving door and stepped out into the cold Chicago air. November had settled into the city the way it always did. Not gradually, but all at once, like someone had flipped a switch and decided warmth was no longer permitted. Her breath came out in small white clouds. She barely noticed. She was already rehearsing what she would say to Adrian. She had run through the words a dozen times on the examination table while the technician moved the probe across her belly. She had practiced the exact expression she wanted to see on his face when she told him. She was 8 weeks along. The doctor had said everything looked healthy. Strong heartbeat, good positioning. She had cried in the car on the way over and she wasn't even ashamed of it. After 3 years of trying, after 2 miscarriages that neither she nor Adrian had spoken about out loud to anyone, after a year of telling herself to stop expecting things she might never have, this felt like proof that something in the universe had finally decided she had suffered enough. She was still smiling when she spotted the black SUV. It was parked at the far end of the hospital's main drop-off lane, engine running, hazard lights blinking amber against the gray November sky. She recognized it immediately. A custom-built Chevrolet Suburban with tinted windows so dark they were technically illegal in Illinois. Adrian had 3 of them. His drivers kept them rotating. She had ridden in that exact vehicle hundreds of times, knew the sound the door made when it closed, the particular way the suspension sat when the vehicle was carrying weight. What stopped her wasn't the vehicle. It was the woman. She was blonde, heavily pregnant, moving carefully across the hospital's concrete sidewalk in a long camel coat that couldn't quite conceal the size of her belly. She walked with one hand pressed to the small of her back and the other extended slightly for balance. A woman in her final weeks. Someone who needed help and knew it. And Adrian was at her side. Charlotte stopped walking. She stood on the edge of the curb, 5 car lengths away, and watched her husband take the woman's hand and guide her toward the Suburban with a gentleness she recognized. It wasn't performance. She had seen Adrian perform tenderness before, at galas, at family dinners, for an audience that needed convincing. This wasn't that. This was the real thing. The way he placed one hand at the small of the woman's back while opening the door with the other. The way he ducked his head to check that she was fully seated before closing it. The way he lingered for 1 extra second with his hand on the doorframe, as though reluctant to put even a piece of metal between himself and her. Charlotte's lungs stopped working properly. The ultrasound photo crinkled in her fingers. She told herself there was an explanation. There were a dozen explanations. Adrian employed people. He helped people. The Moreau Syndicate ran operations that touched every corner of the city, and Adrian had a habit of appearing places he wasn't expected. The woman could be anyone, an employee, a family connection, someone's wife who needed a ride. She almost convinced herself. Then the SUV's window rolled down. Adrian leaned in through the driver's side window and said something that made the woman laugh, really laugh, throwing her head back against the seat. And he smiled. Not the smile Charlotte saw in press photographs or across boardroom tables, or even at their own dinner table anymore. The unguarded one. The one from years ago, from before the empire, before the power, before the man he had become had swallowed the man she had fallen in love with. Charlotte's body moved before her mind gave permission. She was at her car in 30 seconds. Keys out, engine on. She pulled out of the parking structure 1 level behind the Suburban and followed it north on Michigan Avenue, then west, then onto the highway. Her hands were steady on the wheel. That surprised her. Inside, she was shaking apart, but her hands were perfectly still, 10 and 2, following the vehicle with 3 cars of distance between them, the way she imagined you were supposed to do it. She had never followed anyone in her life. She discovered she was apparently good at it. The Suburban exited the highway 40 minutes later. The neighborhood shifted. The density of the city thinned out and then disappeared entirely, replaced by long stretches of road flanked by bare-limbed trees and old money properties set far back from the street behind stone walls and iron gates. She had been to this part of the city's outskirts only twice, and both times as Adrian's wife, invited to homes that cost more than some countries. She didn't know whose property this was. She found out when the Suburban slowed at a gate. The gate opened from the inside. Charlotte pulled her car onto the shoulder 50 yards back and cut the engine and sat there in the cold with the heat fading and watched the Suburban pass through and disappear up a long gravel drive toward a house that was more mansion than house. 3 stories, limestone facade, lit from the outside by warm amber lights that made it look like something from a magazine spread about old Chicago wealth. She sat in the car for a long time. She was not a woman who fell apart easily. Charlotte Whitmore had grown up with money, but not softness. Her father, Gerald Whitmore, was old Chicago business, the kind of man who shook hands and ended careers at the same table and considered emotional expression a character flaw. She had inherited his architecture, but not his coldness. She had learned early how to hold herself together in rooms that wanted to break her. She had stood beside Adrian at events where half the attendees knew exactly what he was and smiled through every second of it. But sitting in that car, watching the gate close, holding an ultrasound photo of a baby she had just found out existed, something cracked. Not broke. Not yet. Cracked. She got out of the car. The cold hit her immediately. She hadn't brought a heavy coat. She'd gone straight from the office to the clinic, expecting to be home by 6. Her blazer was not built for November on the outskirts of Chicago. She walked along the stone wall that bordered the property until she found a section where the exterior floodlights didn't quite reach, where an elm tree growing too close to the wall had pushed the stone up enough to give her footholds. She stared at that wall for a moment, then she climbed it. She dropped down on the other side into cold, wet grass and crouched there for a moment, listening. A dog barked somewhere distant. Wind moved through the elm trees lining the drive. She could see the house clearly from where she crouched, lights in multiple windows, the Suburban parked in the circular drive near the front entrance. She moved along the tree line toward the house. She stopped at the edge of the tree line, maybe 30 feet from the front steps, and she watched. Adrian came back out the front door. He was alone. He had taken off his coat. In the amber light of the entryway, he stood at the top of the stone steps with his phone in his hand and ran the other hand through his hair. A gesture Charlotte knew meant he was thinking, sorting something out, deciding something. He was still handsome, 41, and built the way men built by adversity rather than gyms are built. Broad through the shoulders, always slightly tired around the eyes, always slightly watchful in a way that never fully switched off no matter where he was or who he was with. She had found that quality magnetic once. She watched him type something on his phone. He looked up. He looked out toward the gate. He looked back toward the house. He made a decision she couldn't read. Then the front door opened again and the woman appeared. She had changed out of the camel coat. She was wearing a cream-colored sweater now, her blonde hair loose around her shoulders. She moved carefully down the single step from the threshold to the landing, one hand against the door frame for balance. Adrian turned when he heard the door. The distance between them closed without either of them visibly deciding to close it. One moment they were separate. The next his arm was around her shoulders, and her head was turned up toward his, and he kissed her. Not a performance, not something engineered for an audience, with the ease of deep familiarity, the kind of kiss that doesn't need to announce itself because it already knows it belongs. The sound Charlotte made was quiet, not a sob, not a scream, something lower than both of those things, something that came from a place in the chest she hadn't known existed until that exact second. Her hand pressed flat against the bark of the elm tree she had been gripping. Her knees wanted to go. She held them. She turned and walked back to the wall. She climbed it. She didn't remember climbing it. She was on the other side, and then she was at her car, and then she was driving, and she couldn't feel her hands on the wheel anymore, but they were still moving, still steering, still keeping her alive on instinct, while the rest of her sat somewhere outside her body, watching this happen to a woman she no longer recognized. She drove for 40 minutes before she stopped. She stopped at a gas station on the north side, pulled into the lot, cut the engine, and sat with the ultrasound photo on the passenger seat beside her. The image showed a small curved shape, barely distinguishable, floating in gray static. The strongest heartbeat the technician had ever heard, she had said. She had said it twice. Charlotte stared at the photo. Then she picked up her phone and called the only person she was not ashamed to fall apart in front of. Her college roommate, Diane Rowe, answered on the second ring. "Charlie, it's almost 9. I need you to find out who owns a property." Charlotte's voice was steady in a way that she knew frightened people who knew her. "Estate, north side, off Sheridan, about 40 minutes out. Limestone. 3 stories. Big iron gate." A pause. "What's going on? Can you find it? Charlotte, can you find it or not?" She heard Diane's breathing shift. They had been friends for 9 years. Diane knew what that voice meant. "Give me 20 minutes." It took her 12. The property was registered to a holding company called Hart Residential LLC. Diane found the principal name on the original purchase agreement in 4 more minutes. Vanessa Hart. Charlotte knew the name. She had met Vanessa Hart exactly twice. Once at an office function 18 months ago, Adrian's quarterly gathering for senior staff, held at their home on the Gold Coast. Vanessa had been his executive assistant for 3 years at that point, early 30s. Composed. The kind of professional who made you feel slightly underdressed simply by being thorough. Charlotte had noticed her the way she noticed most of Adrian's employees, as background, competent, irrelevant to her life. The second time was 5 months ago. Charlotte had stopped by Adrian's building unannounced to bring him a document he had forgotten, and Vanessa had been at the elevator on his private floor, just stepping out, holding a garment bag. She had smiled. She had been professional. Charlotte had noticed nothing because she had not been looking for anything to notice. She sat in the gas station parking lot and thought about how many things she had not been looking for. The drive home to their Gold Coast townhouse took 20 minutes. She parked in the garage. She sat in the car in the dark for a while. She walked inside. The house was empty. Their housekeeper, Marguerite, had left at 7 as she always did on Thursdays. Charlotte moved through the kitchen and didn't turn on the lights. She sat at the kitchen island in the dark with her phone face down in front of her and the ultrasound photo beside it. She was still sitting there at midnight when she heard Adrian's key in the door. She didn't move. He came in through the front, heard nothing, checked the security panel out of habit, saw her car was in the garage. He moved through the front hall and into the kitchen doorway and reached for the light switch. The lights came on. He saw her. She watched his face do what faces do when they've been carrying something heavy for a long time and suddenly realized the weight has been noticed. It wasn't guilt exactly. It was closer to the look of a man who had been rehearsing for a conversation he hadn't expected to have tonight. "You're up late," he said. "I went to the hospital today." Her voice was flat. Not cold. Flat. Emptied of inflection the way a room is emptied of furniture. "I had a scheduled appointment, the one you forgot about last week." He hadn't moved from the doorway. "Right, I meant to—" "I'm pregnant, Adrian." Silence. She watched him absorb it, watched the calculation happen behind his eyes. The man whose entire life was built on reading rooms and making split-second decisions was suddenly very still in her kitchen doorway at midnight. And in that stillness she saw something she had not wanted to see. He wasn't happy. He wasn't sad. He was calculating. "That's... Charlotte, that's..." "I followed you tonight." She slid the ultrasound photo across the marble countertop toward him. "From the hospital. You were there. Did you know I was there?" "In the same building. I was in prenatal. I walked out and I saw you helping a woman into your car." He said nothing. "I followed you to a property on Sheridan Road. It's registered to Vanessa Hart." She paused. "The woman you were with was heavily pregnant." The kitchen was very quiet. "So I need you to tell me something." Her eyes were dry. She had cried all the crying she was going to do in the car. "I need you to tell me what is happening, and I need you to tell me right now, and I need you to tell me the truth, because I am holding the picture of our baby, and I am choosing to believe there is an explanation, and I am giving you exactly one chance to give it to me." Adrian Moreau, crime boss, feared underboss of the Moreau Syndicate, a man who had sat across tables from federal agents and walked out clean, a man who had ordered things done in dark rooms that Charlotte had never asked about and he had never offered, stood in his kitchen doorway in his very expensive suit, and looked at the ultrasound photo and said nothing. The silence told her everything she had not wanted to know. She stood up from the island. "I want her name," Charlotte said. "The full story, right now." He finally moved into the kitchen. He pulled out the stool on the far side of the island, put the marble between them, she noticed, without seeming to, and sat down. He ran both hands over his face. "It's complicated." "Don't." "Charlotte, do not tell me it's complicated. Do not tell me that." Her hands were flat on the island. "Is that Vanessa Hart? Is that your assistant?" A beat. "Former assistant." "When?" He looked at the countertop. "About 14 months ago." The number landed. 14 months. She traced backward through 14 months and started cataloging things that had felt like nothing at the time. The late nights that happened more frequently, the trips that ran longer, the specific quality of his distraction that she had attributed to business. She had never questioned it because questioning Adrian was something she had learned not to do, not out of fear, but out of a trained belief that she was supposed to trust him. She had believed she had earned that trust as a two-way thing. "Is she pregnant with your child?" His jaw tightened. "Adrian." "She says it is." "You don't know?" He looked up. "It's complicated, Charlotte, and I know you don't want to hear that word, but is it yours or isn't it?" "I don't know for certain," she breathed. She breathed carefully and deliberately, the way you breathe when the floor has dropped out from under you and you are locating the wall by feel. "How long have you been with her?" "I told you, 14. Not the affair. How long have you been taking care of her?" Something shifted in his expression, a specific kind of discomfort. 6 months. "You set her up in that house." He said nothing. "You've been paying for that house. That's why you restructured the Cayman account in May." She hadn't connected it at the time. She was connecting it now, fast and cold, and with the specific misery of someone who has all the puzzle pieces and has been living inside the wrong picture. "You've been running a second household." He didn't deny it. Charlotte picked up the ultrasound photo. She looked at it for a moment. Then she set it very carefully back on the countertop, face up, so that the small curved shape of the heartbeat was visible to both of them, and she walked out of the kitchen. She went upstairs. She went into the bathroom. She locked the door and sat on the edge of the tub and allowed herself 3 minutes of whatever it was that needed to come out. It wasn't crying exactly. It was something more structural, like something load-bearing had given way. After 3 minutes, she stood up, washed her face with cold water, looked at herself in the mirror. She went to the guest room. She did not sleep. At 6 in the morning, she dressed, packed a single bag, and drove to Diane's apartment in Lincoln Park. She did not tell Adrian she was going. She did not leave a note. She sat at Diane's kitchen table and drank coffee and told her everything. And Diane, who had never liked Adrian and had never said so out loud, sat and listened and said nothing except the right things at the right moments. Charlotte had not yet confronted Vanessa Hart. She made that decision at 9 in the morning. She drove back out to the Sheridan Road estate alone. It was a clear November morning, the light flat and cold. She rang the intercom at the gate. Nothing happened for a long moment. Then the gate opened. She drove up the gravel drive and parked behind the Suburban, which was still there from the night before. The front door opened before she reached it. Vanessa Hart was not what Charlotte expected, and also exactly what she had expected. Tall, early 30s, pretty in a composed and deliberate way. She was wearing a silk maternity robe and holding a cup of tea, and her expression when she saw Charlotte was not guilty. It was something worse. It was prepared. "Mrs. Moreau," she said. "Charlotte." She corrected it because she didn't want Vanessa Hart using her married name. "I'd like to talk." "I thought you might." Vanessa stepped back from the door. They sat in a living room that had been furnished with money and intention. Not the same taste as Charlotte's homes. Different, softer, with warm colors and a particular domestic comfort that made Charlotte's stomach clench. This had been decorated for a life. Someone's idea of what a life should look like. "How far along are you?" Charlotte said. 36 weeks. "And you're claiming it's his." Vanessa set down her tea and looked at Charlotte with the patience of a woman who had been preparing for this. "I'm not claiming anything. It is his. He told me he wasn't sure. Adrian says many things depending on who he's talking to." There it was. The flick of a blade between two words. Not hostility, something more measured than that. A woman establishing the terms of a conversation on her own turf. Charlotte felt a grudging recognition of the technique. She would have used it herself. How long have you been in love with him? Charlotte said. Vanessa's composure shifted slightly. Not broke. Shifted. I don't think that's relevant. It is to me. A pause. 3 years. Before the affair started. Yes. Did he pursue you or did you pursue him? Charlotte, I'm asking a direct question. Did he come to you or did you make it happen? Vanessa's chin went up slightly. It wasn't one-sided. That's not an answer. He came to me first. She said it without apology, but also without satisfaction, as though stating a fact she had spent a long time deciding what to do with. He came to me first, and I should have said no, and I didn't, and I'm not going to tell you I regret all of it, because I don't. Charlotte held her eyes. You're carrying a child that may or may not belong to my husband. You're living in a house he's paying for, and you've spent the past 14 months helping him maintain a marriage he was never fully in while you knew I was trying to have a baby. Something moved across Vanessa's face. Did you know? Charlotte said. Did you know I was trying? The silence stretched. He told you. It wasn't a question. He told you about the miscarriages. Vanessa looked at her tea. He told you and you stayed. Charlotte's voice didn't waver. She wouldn't allow it. All right. She stood. We're done here. I want to know one thing before I go. Was there ever a moment, a single moment, where you thought about what you were doing to another woman? Not to me specifically, to any woman. Vanessa looked up. I thought about it, she said quietly, and I kept going anyway. Charlotte nodded. At least one of you is honest. She was almost at the door when she heard the car in the drive. She knew the sound of his engine. She turned and Vanessa was already standing, which meant Vanessa had known he was coming, which meant Vanessa had called him the moment Charlotte's car appeared on the intercom camera. She had been expected. The conversation had been managed. Charlotte was still standing in the center of the living room when Adrian came through the front door. He took in the scene. His face went through 3 expressions in 2 seconds. The third one settled into something controlled and careful. Charlotte, I didn't know you were... You absolutely knew, she said. She called you the moment I rang the gate. He closed the door behind him. He looked at Vanessa. Some exchange happened between them that Charlotte felt in the room without being able to read it. Then he looked back at Charlotte. This wasn't how I wanted this to go, he said. How did you want it to go, Adrian? Walk me through the plan. She wasn't yelling. She wanted to yell. The restraint was enormous, and she knew she was going to pay for it later. Did you have a plan? Did you ever have a plan? Or were you just going to keep running 2 lives until one of them ended? You need to lower your voice. I need to lower... She stopped, breathed. I'm in her house. I came here to talk. I talked. I'm leaving. And then you and I are going to have a completely different conversation tonight with lawyers. Charlotte, I'm pregnant. She looked at him with everything she had refused to feel in the kitchen the night before. I'm carrying your child, and I find out today that you have a woman 36 weeks along in a house you've been secretly running for 6 months while I have been in fertility treatment, in grief counseling, in this marriage believing it was a real marriage. Her voice cracked on the last word. Just barely. You don't get to tell me to lower my voice in this house. She moved toward the door. What happened next happened fast. She was never entirely sure afterward how the sequence went. Vanessa said something behind her, something directed at Adrian, not at Charlotte, something short and sharp that Charlotte didn't fully process. Adrian moved toward Charlotte. She didn't know if it was to stop her or to say something or just to be between her and the door. They were close together in the narrow entryway hall, all 3 of them, in a space that was not built for confrontation. She pushed past him. His hand caught her arm. She pulled against it. Let go of me. Just stop for a second. Let go. She didn't see his hand move. She felt the impact, the side of her face, the wall at her back, then the floor, the cold hardwood against her cheek, a sound she didn't recognize at first, too high and strange and continuous, and then realized it was coming from her, the door frame above her, Adrian's shape in her blurred vision, one hand over his mouth, already backing away from what he had just done, as though the distance could revoke it. Vanessa somewhere in the background, frozen. The pain in Charlotte's face was secondary to something else, something she felt lower and more central, a pressure that was wrong, a warmth where there should not have been warmth. She looked down. She pressed her hand to her abdomen. "Call an ambulance," she said to no one in particular. Her voice was very quiet and completely calm, the way a voice gets when the mind has absorbed more than it can process and has defaulted to pure function. Nobody moved for a second that lasted too long. "Call an ambulance right now!" Louder this time. She was still conscious when they arrived. She was barely conscious by the time they reached the hospital. She heard voices telling her to stay with them, telling her to keep her eyes open. She heard monitors. She felt hands. She felt the specific velocity of a gurney moving through a hospital corridor at maximum speed, the ceiling tiles passing above her face in a blur. She thought about the ultrasound photo still on her kitchen counter. She thought, "I didn't bring it with me." She thought, "I should have brought it with me." Then everything went silent and very dark, and she stopped thinking anything at all. She woke in a recovery room. A doctor was there. A woman, 50s, with the particular expression that doctors wear when they have only one thing left to tell you, and they have been waiting with it. Charlotte looked at the ceiling and then at the doctor and said, "Tell me." The doctor told her. Charlotte closed her eyes. Outside in the hospital corridor, a man she had not seen since college graduation sat in a plastic chair with his elbows on his knees and his hands folded and his jaw tight. He had been there for 4 hours. He had followed the ambulance. He had not left. His name was Nathaniel Blackwood, and Charlotte had no idea he was there. No idea that the man who had watched her world fall apart from a parking structure across the street from the hospital the previous evening, who had been there by accident and stayed on purpose, had been the one to call the ambulance when no one inside that house moved fast enough. No idea that this was not the last time his timing would be the difference between catastrophe and survival. No idea what was coming. The recovery room smelled like antiseptic and recycled air, and something beneath both of those things that Charlotte couldn't name but recognized. The particular institutional smell of a place where bad news lived permanently, where it had soaked into the walls and the ceiling tiles and the thin cotton of the blankets they put over you when your body had stopped doing what it was supposed to do. She had been awake for 40 minutes. The doctor had spoken. The nurse had spoken. Someone from the administrative side had come in with paperwork and left without making eye contact, which told Charlotte everything about how the hospital staff had processed the situation. A woman admitted by ambulance. No family present. No husband. A miscarriage at 8 weeks following physical trauma. Physical trauma. That was what the paperwork called it. Charlotte stared at the ceiling and let the phrase sit in her chest like a stone. The door opened and she expected another nurse. It was not a nurse. The man in the doorway was tall, 6'2" maybe, with the kind of build that came from discipline rather than vanity. Dark suit, no tie, top button open, dark hair that needed cutting. He was holding 2 cups of vending machine coffee, and he looked like a man who had been sitting in a hospital corridor for a very long time and had decided that was not enough and had done something about it. She knew his face. It took her 3 seconds to place it because the last time she had seen it in person was 9 years ago, and the version in her memory was 22 years old and slightly sunburned from a graduation weekend spent mostly on the roof of a campus building. But the face was the same. Older now, harder through the jaw, with the specific stillness of someone who had learned to carry weight without showing it. "Nathaniel," she said. His name came out like she'd been holding it without knowing it. Nathaniel Blackwood crossed the room and set one of the paper cups on the tray beside her bed. He pulled the chair close and sat down and said nothing for a moment. He looked at her face and she watched him absorb the bruising along her cheekbone without reacting to it. Not because it didn't register, she could tell from the quality of his stillness that it registered completely, but because he had decided that reacting would not be useful to her right now. "How long have you been here?" she said. "Since the ambulance." She looked at him. "How did you—" "I was in the parking structure across from the hospital yesterday. I saw you come out. I saw what happened after." He picked up his coffee. "I followed the ambulance. I wasn't going to leave you here alone." "You could have come in. You didn't know I was in Chicago." He said it simply, not as an excuse. "I didn't want the first thing you processed to be me." Charlotte looked at the paper cup on the tray. She wasn't ready to pick it up. She wasn't ready to do anything that constituted moving forward. She understood intellectually that time was going to continue passing whether she wanted it to or not, But her body was still several minutes behind her mind, and her mind was not in great shape. "They told you," Nathaniel said. It wasn't a question. Yes. He didn't say he was sorry. She was grateful for that. She had already calculated how many times in the next weeks she was going to have to absorb someone else's sorrow about this thing that had happened to her. How many times she was going to have to manage other people's discomfort about her loss while simultaneously trying to survive it herself. Nathaniel saying nothing was the first clean space she'd been given since she walked out of that hospital 24 hours ago, believing her life was about to become what she had always wanted. She picked up the coffee. "He hit me," she said. The quality of the silence changed. "I know," Nathaniel said. "I don't know if he meant to." She turned the paper cup in both hands. "I've been trying to figure out if that matters, and I can't decide." "It doesn't." She looked at him. "I'm not saying that to be simple about it," he said. "I'm saying intended or not, you're in a hospital bed and there's a bruise on your face and the pregnancy is gone. The mechanics of how it happened don't change any part of what happened." She breathed in through her nose slowly. "I know. Do you have somewhere to go?" "Diane's." "Okay." He stood. He didn't make a production of it. "I'll drive you when they discharge you, if you want. If you'd rather I call Diane, I'll do that." He picked up his empty cup. "I'm going to go find something with actual caffeine in it. I'll be outside." He was at the door when she said his name. He stopped. "Why are you in Chicago?" she said. Something moved across his face that she would think about later when she had more capacity for it. "I'll explain when you're out of this room," he said. Then he was gone. She was discharged by noon. She did not see Adrian. She had his number blocked on her phone before the discharge paperwork was finished. She did not call her parents. She would deal with her parents later when she could say what needed saying without her father turning it into a conversation about optics and her mother crying and making it about something other than what it was. Diane knew. That was enough for today. Nathaniel drove her to Lincoln Park in a black Audi that smelled like leather and clean air and had the seat already adjusted for her before she got in, which she noticed and then stopped herself from analyzing. He drove without talking. She kept her face toward the window and watched Chicago pass. They had spent 4 years at the same university. Same program, same year, same overlapping circles. And she had always known him as someone whose default mode was useful rather than decorative. He had been the person in study groups who showed up with the work already done and then helped everyone else finish theirs. She had always liked him with the easy, uncomplicated affection of someone who expects to keep seeing a person and therefore doesn't feel urgency about it. And then they had graduated and entered different stratospheres, and that had been that. He had spent the last 3 years in Europe. She knew from mutual connections, running an international division of Blackwood Global Holdings after his father's health declined. She had sent a card when the senior Blackwood passed, 18 months ago. She wasn't sure if it had reached him. He pulled up in front of Diane's building and kept the engine running. "I'm in Chicago for the restructuring," he said, "taking over as CEO formally at the first of the year. I'll be here." He looked at her. "I'm not saying that as anything other than information. I'm not going anywhere, and if you need anything, Nathaniel, I'm reachable." "I know." She had her hand on the door handle. "Thank you for not leaving me there." She went inside. Diane had cleared this guest room, changed the sheets, left a stack of towels on the chair. She had also stocked the bathroom cabinet with things Charlotte might need and left a handwritten note on the nightstand that said only, "I'm in the kitchen when you're ready. No rush. No questions until you want them." Charlotte read the note and sat on the edge of the bed and understood she was going to cry again, and did it quickly and with as much efficiency as she could manage, and then washed her face and went to the kitchen. They talked for 3 hours. At the end of it, Diane said, "What do you need right now?" "Today. One thing." Charlotte thought about it. "A lawyer. I know 3. The best one." "They're all the best one. They just specialize differently." "Divorce and asset protection." Diane picked up her phone without another word. The lawyer's name was Margaret Tisai, and she had the particular quality of a person who has heard every version of every terrible thing and has decided that her job is not to be surprised but to be precise. She met Charlotte at her office on Michigan Avenue the following morning. She listened to everything without interrupting. She took notes in a small, precise handwriting that Charlotte noticed but couldn't read from across the desk. When Charlotte finished, Margaret Sy set down her pen. "You're aware of what your husband does for a living," she said. "Yes." "Then you understand that conventional divorce proceedings will have unconventional complications." "Tell me what I need to know." "The estate, your primary residence, is in both names. The offshore structures are in his alone, which is actually useful for our purposes, because it means they can't be claimed jointly. Your personal assets, the ones you brought into the marriage, are protected by the prenuptial agreement." She paused. "You did sign a prenuptial agreement?" "Yes." "I'll need to review it. I'll have it sent today." Margaret Sy looked at her for a moment. "I want to ask you something that isn't strictly legal." Charlotte nodded. "Do you want him to know you've engaged me, or do you want to move quietly first?" Charlotte thought about the kitchen at midnight, the ultrasound photo on the counter, the calculation she had seen move behind his eyes. "Quietly," she said. "For now." For 2 weeks, she moved through Diane's apartment like someone learning to occupy space again. She went to work. She was not going to stop going to work. That thought had lasted approximately 4 minutes. And she was good at her work, and she was going to keep being good at it, because that was one thing Adrian had not been able to take from her, had never even tried to take from it, which was a particular kind of mercy she had not appreciated until now. The agency she ran her division for had no connection to the Moreau Syndicate. It was hers. It had always been entirely hers. Adrian called twice. She didn't answer. He sent a message that said, "I need you to understand what happened. Please give me the chance to explain." She read it and put her phone face down. He sent a second one 4 days later. "Charlotte, whatever you're doing, I need you to stop. There are complications you don't understand, and I can't explain over text." She forwarded both to Margaret Sy. On the 15th day, she came home to Diane's apartment and found Adrian in the lobby. He was not aggressive. He was not drunk. He was wearing the gray overcoat she had bought him 2 Christmases ago, and he looked like a man who had not been sleeping well, which gave her a feeling she refused to identify. "You can't be here," she said. "I just need 10 minutes. "No." "Charlotte." "Adrian." She stopped walking toward the elevator and turned to look at him directly. The bruise on her cheek had faded to yellow by now. She watched him look at it. "I'm in contact with my attorney. If you want to communicate about the divorce, you communicate through yours. If you show up at my location again, I will call the police and I will tell them exactly what happened at Vanessa Hart's house, and I will let the paperwork follow." His jaw tightened. "You do that, it opens doors neither of us wants opened. Then don't make me do it." They looked at each other. There was a time, a long time, years of it, when his face had been her reference point for safety. When she could walk into any room he was in and something in her chest would settle. She was looking at the same face and feeling nothing that resembled that. She was feeling tired, acutely and completely tired. "Vanessa's not carrying my child," he said. She heard the words. She let them land. "Excuse me." It's complicated. There was a test. I had it done privately." He looked away. "The child isn't mine." She stared at him. "I've been supporting her because she told me it was mine and I believed her, and I had already made commitments I didn't know how to walk back from, and by the time I understood what was happening—" "Stop." Charlotte held up her hand. "Stop. I need you to hear this. What I'm hearing," she said slowly, "is that you maintained a secret household for 6 months, had an affair for over a year, hit me in that woman's entryway, and I lost our baby. And now the story has changed. And you want me to what, Adrian? You want me to... What is the version of this that ends well for you? What are you hoping I do right now?" His face did something complicated. "I'm not hoping for anything. I'm telling you the truth. You should have tried that 14 months ago." She pressed the elevator button. "I mean it about the lawyers." She got in the elevator. She pressed the button for the 4th floor. She kept her face forward and her hands still. When the doors closed, she leaned against the back wall and breathed through her mouth until the floor arrived. She did not tell Diane what had happened in the lobby. She lay in the guest room with the lights off and thought about what he had said, and decided she had no infrastructure left for processing it tonight. She filed it somewhere and closed the drawer. She did not sleep well. At work the following week, someone new appeared on her professional calendar. Her director of accounts, Phil Garrett, mid-50s, the kind of man who communicated everything important with the volume of his not saying it, stopped by her office door Wednesday morning and told her they had a new enterprise contract coming through. Blackwood Global Holdings was restructuring their entire North American communications portfolio. They had specifically requested her division. Charlotte looked up from her desk. They asked for us by name, she said. Asked for you by name, actually. Phil's expression was neutral, in the way that professional expressions are neutral when they are being very careful. New CEO is hands-on, apparently, wants senior-level account management on the comms side. She understood immediately. She picked up her phone after Phil left and typed, "Did you do this?" Nathaniel's response came in 4 minutes. "I needed the best division in the city. Your name came up in the research." She stared at the screen. He sent a follow-up. "I'm serious. You can say no. The contract stands either way because your team is genuinely the right fit. But I wanted to be transparent." She set the phone down. She picked it up again. She typed, "We'll do a capabilities presentation Friday." She was not going to turn down a legitimate enterprise contract because of personal history. That was not how she operated, and she was not going to start now. Friday's presentation lasted 90 minutes. Nathaniel was professional in a way she respected, not performatively professional, not compensating for something, but genuinely engaged with the work, asking specific questions that demonstrated he had read their materials thoroughly rather than delegating that to someone else. He had 2 senior members of his team with him who were sharp and direct, and she enjoyed the challenge of their questions. She was good at this. She had always been good at this. Afterward, when his team had stepped out and they were alone for 30 seconds in the conference room, he said, "You're good at what you do." "I know," she said. And then, because it was accurate, and she had decided to be accurate with him, "Thank you for calling the ambulance." He looked at her. "You don't owe me anything for that." "I know I don't. I'm saying thank you anyway." He nodded and picked up his materials and left, and she stood at the window of the conference room and watched him walk across the open floor below, and thought about the difference between a person who needs something from you and a person who simply shows up. The divorce papers were filed the last week of November. Adrian was served on a Tuesday. By Thursday, Charlotte had heard from 3 different mutual connections that he was furious. Not the cold, controlled anger that was his public register, but something rawer, which meant it was real. She absorbed this information and took the precaution of changing the security codes on her office and notifying the building's front desk to require additional verification for any visitors to her floor. Diane called her paranoid. Charlotte said she preferred prepared. The following week, Nathaniel called. "There's a function Friday," he said. "Industry thing, black tie. I'm expected to appear and make the rounds as the new name on the building." A pause. "I have no interest in going alone." She thought about it. "That's either a professional invitation or a personal one." "I'm aware of the ambiguity," he said. "I'm leaving it there on purpose. You can decide which one to accept." She went to the function. It was the first public event she had attended since the hospital. She wore a dress she had bought before everything happened. Black, structured, the kind of dress that communicated that the person inside it had not been defeated. And she stood in a room full of Chicago's financial and social establishment, and she talked about work and shook hands and felt, for the first time in weeks, like herself. Nathaniel was good in a room. Not in the way Adrian was good in a room. Adrian's social gift had always been a kind of controlled menace, a gravitational pull that people mistook for warmth. Nathaniel's was something different. He paid attention, genuinely and specifically, in a way that was rarer than people understood. He remembered names without being told twice, and connected people to each other with a lateral intelligence that moved conversation forward, rather than keeping it circling his own orbit. She watched him work the room and understood that she was watching a different species of powerful man. Near the end of the evening, he found her at the bar. "You look like someone who's been thinking too hard," he said. "I look like someone who is 2 glasses into a decent burgundy and reconsidering several life choices." "Which ones?" "The one where I agreed to marry a man because I believed that loyalty was transferable." She set down her glass. "I helped him build everything he has. My family's money helped him finish school. My belief helped him believe in himself. And the whole time I was doing that, I was operating on the assumption that what you build together belongs to both of you." She paused. "I was wrong about what I was building." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. "What were you building?" "His version of his life." She picked up her glass again. "I was a character in his story. I thought it was our story." The car that picked them up was Nathaniel's. She had intended to take her own car home, but it was late and she had the Burgundy to consider, and his driver was already there. They sat in the back seat in companionable silence for 10 minutes. "I'd like to see you again," he said. Not asking, stating. Not at a function, not with an industry rationale. She looked out the window. The city at night was the same city it had always been. Indifferent and brilliant and full of people doing things they would regret and things they wouldn't. "I'm not ready," she said. "I know. I don't know when I will be. I know that too." He looked ahead. "I'm not in a hurry, Charlotte. I've been in a hurry my whole life and I'm done with it." She thought about that as the car pulled up to Diane's building. She got out. She did not look back and she did not make any promises, and she went upstairs and lay in the dark and felt, for the first time since everything broke, something that was not grief. It was smaller than hope. Thinner. A specific kind of tentative aliveness, like circulation returning to a limb that had been numb. She didn't trust it yet, but it was there. The call came 3 weeks into the new year. She was in her office at 7 in the morning, which was when she did her best work now, before the rest of the floor arrived, in the specific quiet of a building still coming online. Her coffee was on her desk, and she had 3 contracts open on her screen, and she was doing fine. She was doing genuinely fine. Margaret Tsai's name appeared on her screen. She answered. "Adrian's attorneys have filed a counterclaim," Margaret said. "They're contesting the asset structure, and they've raised the prenuptial's legitimacy." Charlotte set down her coffee. "They're contesting the prenup. They're arguing that certain verbal agreements made during the marriage constitute an informal modification. It's not likely to hold, but it will slow things down and cost money to fight." A pause. "There's something else. They've submitted a filing that includes a claim that you were engaged in an affair prior to filing for divorce." The room was very quiet. "That's a lie," Charlotte said. "I know that, but they've submitted documentation, photographs." Margaret's voice was careful. "Of you and Nathaniel Blackwood at the industry function last November, and at a subsequent lunch meeting in December." Charlotte closed her eyes. "Charlie," Margaret, who never used her shortened name, "I need you to be completely honest with me about the nature of your current relationship with Mr. Blackwood." "It's professional," Charlotte said. "His company is a client. He's someone I knew in college. Nothing has happened between us." "Then the documentation is incomplete and misleading, and we can fight it." A pause. "But I need to warn you, if Adrian Moreau's legal team is willing to fabricate a counter-narrative, they're going to look for every angle. That means anyone close to you is a potential leverage point." Charlotte was quiet for a moment. She thought about Nathaniel walking into a hospital with vending machine coffee at midnight. She thought about a car already adjusted for her before she got in. She thought about a man who had told her he was not in a hurry and had apparently meant it. She thought about what it would cost him if Adrian turned his attention that direction. "I need to make a call," she said. She called Nathaniel. He answered on the first ring. "Adrian's lawyers are using photographs of us to build a counter-narrative," she said. "Professionally, we're fine, but if Adrian decides to escalate beyond legal channels..." "Charlotte," his voice was even. "Are you telling me this so I'll distance myself?" She didn't answer immediately. "Because if that's what you're doing," he said, "the answer is no." "Nathaniel, I'm aware of who Adrian Moreau is. I have been aware since the night I sat in a parking structure and watched what his people did. I made a choice to stay in your proximity, and that choice stands. You don't get to make it for me." She was quiet. "What does your lawyer need?" he said. Before she could answer, her second line lit up. Unknown number. She looked at it and something moved in her chest. A premonition, cold and specific. "Hold on," she said. She switched lines. "Charlotte Whitmore." The voice was a woman's. Composed, professional. A voice that delivered news as information rather than experience. "Speaking. This is Valerie Cross. I'm the administrative coordinator for Blackwood Global Holdings. I'm calling because we need to speak with you regarding a serious matter. It has come to our attention that confidential Blackwood Holdings client files were accessed from your agency's network 3 nights ago and were forwarded to an external address. We have documentation." A pause. "The forwarding IP address has been traced to your executive login." The floor dropped out. Charlotte's hand tightened on the phone. "That's not possible," she said. "Ms. Whitmore, I understand this is..." That is not possible. I have not accessed any Blackwood Holdings files outside of standard account management, and I have never forwarded anything externally. Her voice was steady. Her chest was not. Who authorized this call? This was escalated through our legal team, and who signed off on the decision to call me directly rather than going through my agency's legal department? Give me a name. A pause. I'm not in a position to... Then I'll wait until you are. Charlotte ended the call. She sat in her office in the early morning quiet with the phone in her hand and the city still waking up outside her window, and thought about the chain of events that had led to this specific moment. The photographs, the counter-narrative, the prenup challenge, and now a corporate espionage accusation tied to her login credentials, and understood with complete clarity that these were not coincidences. Someone had spent time on this. Someone had built something. She switched back to Nathaniel. He was still there. Someone accessed Blackwood Holdings files from my login, she said. 3 nights ago. I did not do it. A beat of silence that was different in quality from his usual silences. I know you didn't, he said, and then quieter. Charlotte, I need you to go somewhere safe, right? Go somewhere safe was not a sentence Charlotte had ever expected to hear from a man in a business suit at 7 in the morning while she sat in a glass-walled office on the 14th floor of a building she had worked in for 6 years. She heard it anyway. I'm at the office, she said. I know where you are. That's why I'm saying go somewhere else. His voice had changed register. The measured quality was still there, but underneath it something had tightened, the way a structure tightens before it shifts. Don't use your work computer. Don't log into anything from the building network. Take your personal phone and go to Diane's or somewhere public and call me back from outside. Nathaniel, tell me what you know. A pause. Not hesitation. Calculation. 3 nights ago, I was informed by my internal security team that there had been unusual access on the Holdings client files. Before they escalated it, I asked them to sit on it for 24 hours while I ran my own review. Another pause. Charlotte, the access came from inside my building, not from your agency. Someone used your login credentials from a terminal inside Blackwood Holdings headquarters. She was very still. Someone on your staff, she said. Someone with access to your credentials and access to our internal systems. That is not a coincidence, and it is not a random breach. Someone built this. His voice was flat and certain. I have security pulling the internal camera footage from that floor right now, but I needed you out of your building before whoever made that call to you this morning decides the next step is showing up in person. Charlotte stood up from her desk. She picked up her personal phone, left her work phone on the desk, took her coat from the back of her chair, and walked to the elevator without stopping at her assistant's desk, without signing out, without doing any of the things she would normally do when leaving mid-morning. She pressed the lobby button and watched the floor numbers descend and kept her breathing deliberate. In the lobby, she pushed through the revolving door into the January air and stood on the sidewalk and called Nathaniel back. I'm outside, she said. My car is 2 blocks south, gray Audi. My driver's name is Marcus. He's already moving. She walked south with her coat open and the cold cutting through her blazer and found the Audi idling at the corner. Marcus, 40s, broad-shouldered, the specific alertness of someone trained in more than driving, got out and held the door without speaking. She got in. The car moved immediately. She was taken to Blackwood Holdings' private security office, which was not in the main building but in a separate address 3 blocks over. A floor in a nondescript professional building with no signage and a lobby desk staffed by a man who did not ask her name because he already knew it. She was brought upstairs and put in a conference room with good coffee and no windows, and told that Nathaniel was 10 minutes out. He arrived in 8. He came in with a man she didn't know. Late 40s, close-cropped gray hair, the compressed energy of someone whose entire professional life had been spent in rooms where information was currency. He introduced himself as Roland Graves, head of security for Blackwood Holdings, and he set a laptop on the conference table and turned it toward her without preamble. On the screen was a still image from an internal security camera. The timestamp read 3 days prior, 11:47 p.m. The location marker read, Floor 9, Client Records Access. The person at the terminal was a woman, tall, dark hair pulled back, wearing a Blackwood Holdings employee badge on a lanyard. Charlotte leaned forward. The face was turned 3/4 away from the camera, but the angle was enough. The posture was enough. The specific way the woman held her left shoulder slightly higher than her right, a habitual asymmetry that Charlotte had noticed across a conference table not 3 months ago. "That's Victoria Blackwood," Charlotte said. The name landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Nathaniel did not react visibly. Roland Graves did not react at all. "She has an internal badge," Charlotte said. "She still has building access." "Her access was supposed to be restricted to floors 1 through 3 following the restructuring," Roland said. "Floor 9 requires an additional keycard authorization that she should not have had." He paused. "We believe the secondary authorization was obtained through a staff member who has since been placed on administrative leave." Charlotte sat back in her chair. She looked at Nathaniel. He was standing with his arms crossed and his jaw set, and looking at the frozen image on the screen with the expression of a man absorbing a confirmation he had been hoping not to receive. "How long?" Charlotte said. He looked at her. "How long what?" "How long have you suspected it was her?" A beat. "Since the photographs appeared in Adrian's legal filing." She felt the shape of it forming. "The photographs of us at the function. Those weren't Adrian's people." "No. Victoria gave them to his legal team." "That's what I believe, yes." Charlotte breathed slowly through her nose and looked at the conference table and assembled the architecture of the past 2 months. The counter-narrative in the divorce filing. The accusations of an affair. The photographs taken at a public event but framed as evidence of something clandestine. And now a corporate espionage setup. Her login credentials used from inside a building she didn't work in. A phone call designed to preempt any investigation by putting her on the defensive first. "She's been coordinating with Adrian," Charlotte said. "No." Nathaniel's voice was definite. "That's the part that took me time to understand. Victoria doesn't care about Adrian. She doesn't know him, and he doesn't know her. She's doing this independently." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "Victoria has been under the belief for several years that she and I would eventually marry. It was never something I said. It was something she constructed, and I failed to dismantle clearly enough, early enough, and that failure is mine." His jaw tightened. "When she realized I was spending time with you, she decided you were the obstacle." Charlotte looked at him. "I'm the obstacle to what she believes she is owed." "How long has she been building this?" Roland Graves answered. "Based on what we've reconstructed, she began gathering information approximately 6 weeks after the industry function. She made contact with someone in your agency's IT infrastructure, we don't yet know who, to obtain your credentials. She obtained the Blackwood internal access separately. The timing was deliberate. She waited until the divorce proceedings were at a point where additional evidence of misconduct would cause maximum damage." Charlotte pressed both palms flat on the table. She thought about Margaret Tsai's voice on the phone. "Anyone close to you is a potential leverage point." She thought about how thoroughly she had misread the geography of her own situation. She had been watching Adrian. She had been watching the divorce proceedings. She had been watching the road in front of her, and someone had been moving through the dark on her left flank the entire time. "What does she want?" Charlotte said. "End state. What is she actually trying to accomplish?" "She wants you gone," Nathaniel said. It came out without softness, because he was not a man who dressed up true things in comfortable language. "Gone from my professional life. Gone from my personal proximity. Gone from Chicago, if possible. She doesn't care how it happens. A destroyed reputation would accomplish it. A criminal charge for corporate espionage would be better." He paused. "She has resources. Her adoption into the Blackwood family gave her a trust structure that operates independently of my oversight." "Does she know you've found this footage?" "Not yet." Charlotte looked at Roland Graves. "What happens when she finds out?" The security chief's expression was the expression of a man who had already run the scenario. "She escalates. People who build these kinds of campaigns don't stop when the primary play fails. They have contingencies." Charlotte pushed back from the table and stood up. She walked to the far end of the conference room. There were no windows, but there was a blank wall, and she stood facing it with her back to both men and thought about the fact that she had walked out of a hospital 8 weeks ago with nothing and had spent every day since rebuilding in very small increments, laying one plank at a time, and the floor was currently being pulled out from under her in 3 directions simultaneously. Adrian's legal team attacking the divorce proceedings. A corporate espionage accusation attached to her professional identity. The one thing she had kept clean through all of this. And now a woman she had met twice in a conference room who had apparently decided to burn Charlotte's life down as a prerequisite to her own happiness. She turned around. "I need to talk to Victoria," she said. Both men looked at her. "Charlotte?" Nathaniel started. "Not to confront her, not yet." She came back to the table. "I need to understand what she actually has. The footage proves she accessed the files. It does not tell us what she did with them, who else she's been talking to, or what other material she's been building. If we move on her now with what we have, she burns whatever she's holding, and we're left managing secondary damage we can't see yet." She looked at Roland Graves. "Has she been in contact with anyone in the media?" He checked something on his laptop. "We flagged 2 email exchanges with a business journalist at the Tribune. Nothing published. The conversations appear to be preliminary." "She's holding it," Charlotte said, "because she hasn't fired it yet, which means she's waiting for something." She paused. "She's waiting to see if the corporate espionage angle holds. If your legal team presses charges based on Valerie Cross's call this morning, the Tribune story runs and the divorce counter-narrative lands at the same time, and I'm finished professionally before any of it gets corrected." She looked at Nathaniel. "She's not stupid." "No," he said quietly. "She's not. Then I need access to her before she knows the footage exists. I need to sit in a room with her, and I need to understand the full scope of what she's built." She held his eyes. "Can you get me that?" He was quiet for a moment. "She'll know something is wrong the moment I call her." "Then don't call her. Invite her to something she'd want to attend." Charlotte picked up her coffee cup. "You're the new CEO. There are events, there are family obligations, there are a dozen reasons you might invite her somewhere without it reading as unusual." She set the cup down. "I need 48 hours. Roland Graves looked at Nathaniel. Nathaniel looked at Charlotte with the specific quality of attention he had when he was deciding whether to trust something or someone, not because he was suspicious, but because he was careful with trust and always had been. 48 hours, he said. The event was a small, private dinner at the Blackwood family residence on the North Shore, a property Nathaniel had inherited along with the company, a sprawling lakefront house that his mother still treated as the family's primary social venue. He called his mother that afternoon and asked her to host a family dinner Friday evening. His mother, Eleanor Blackwood, was 71 and sharp and had been trying to get Nathaniel to attend more family functions since his return from Europe. She agreed with the enthusiasm of a woman who had been waiting for exactly this kind of opening. Victoria was invited as a matter of course. She was family. She had always been included. Charlotte was not told the details of the dinner arrangement. She was told only that she would have access to Victoria in a semi-private setting on Friday evening and that Roland Graves would have 2 members of his team on site. She spent the 48 hours in preparation. She worked with Margaret Sy to document her whereabouts and device activity for the night of the file access. She worked with her own agency's IT department to establish a forensic record of her login credentials' integrity. She was methodical and thorough, and she did not tell anyone except Diane what was actually happening. And Diane, who had law school in her background before pivoting to architecture, sat with her 2 evenings in a row and helped her think through angles. Thursday night, Charlotte could not sleep. She lay in the dark at Diane's apartment and stared at the ceiling and ran the conversation she was planning to have with a woman she barely knew. She ran every version of it. She was not afraid of confrontation. She had sat across from Adrian in a kitchen at midnight with her whole life coming apart and had stayed level. She had listened to Vanessa Hart tell her she had kept going anyway and had found a way to walk out of the room. She had endured things that would have fractured women with less structural integrity, and she was still standing. But this was different. This was someone she had never wronged, whose grievance against her was purely territorial, whose campaign against her was not personal in the way betrayal is personal, but purely strategic, the removal of an obstacle. There was something almost more frightening about that. Hatred rooted in injury she understood. She could work with injury. She didn't know what to do with someone who looked at her and saw nothing but a problem to solve. Friday evening, she dressed carefully. Nothing that read as confrontational. A charcoal wrap dress, low heels, her hair down. The visual language of someone who had been invited to dinner and expected dinner. Marcus drove her to the North Shore. She was brought in through a side entrance by Roland Graves, who walked her through the ground floor layout in 4 efficient sentences and told her Victoria had arrived 20 minutes earlier and was currently in the front sitting room with Eleanor. Charlotte went to the front sitting room. Eleanor Blackwood was exactly what the name suggested. Old money, old bearing, the kind of woman who had been the most competent person in every room she'd ever entered and had spent 71 years deciding whether or not to let people know it. She looked at Charlotte when she entered with the evaluating attention of someone conducting a rapid assessment that she had the grace to make feel like warmth. "Ms. Whitmore," she said, "Nathaniel speaks very highly of you." "He's been generous," Charlotte said. Victoria was on the far settee. She was perhaps 34, 35, with the particular groomed attractiveness of someone who had always understood that appearance was a form of armor. Dark hair, good clothes. The expression she wore when Charlotte walked in lasted less than a second before it was replaced with something smooth and composed and socially appropriate. But Charlotte saw it. That fraction of a second. Surprise, recalculated into control in real time. "Victoria," Charlotte said, "I don't think we've been properly introduced. I'm Charlotte Whitmore. I'm working with Nathaniel on the Blackwood Holdings communications restructuring." "I know who you are," Victoria said, and there it was. The slippage, the tiniest departure from the composed surface. The 3 words delivered with a precision that was too precise, too aware, too loaded for a woman who was supposed to be meeting a professional contact for the first time. Eleanor looked between them with the sharp attention of a woman who had been reading rooms for 7 decades. The dinner proceeded. Charlotte was patient. She had always been patient in ways that people mistook for passivity, which was one of the more useful misreadings she had ever allowed to persist. She ate. She conversed. She responded to Eleanor's questions about the communications work with enough specificity to be credible and enough warmth to be likable, and she watched Victoria across the table manage the dinner with the performance of someone who had not expected this variable and was recalculating steadily. After dinner, Eleanor excused herself at Nathaniel's quiet signal. Something had been arranged, Charlotte realized, some cover for Eleanor to withdraw. And Charlotte and Victoria were left at the table with their wine glasses and the remains of dinner between them and the particular silence of 2 people who know a conversation is coming. Charlotte set down her fork. "I know what you did," she said. Victoria's hand was still on her wine glass. She did not move it. "I don't know what you're—" "Floor 9, Blackwood Holdings headquarters. 3 nights ago, 11:47 p.m. Charlotte watched Victoria's face. "The camera coverage on that floor is more thorough than you knew. Roland Graves has had the footage since Wednesday morning." The color in Victoria's face did not drain. She was too controlled for that. But something shifted behind her eyes. A rapid interior adjustment, the way a chess player looks when a piece they thought was safe has suddenly been threatened. "That's a serious accusation," Victoria said. "It's not an accusation. It's a description of documented footage." Charlotte kept her voice even. "I'm not interested in the legal component tonight. I'll leave that to Roland. What I'm interested in is understanding the full scope of what you've built, because I need to know what's still in play before I decide how to respond to the rest of it." Victoria set down her wine glass. "You think you understand what this is," she said. Her voice had changed. The social register was gone, replaced by something more direct, and Charlotte recognized with a distant clinical interest that she was now talking to the real woman. "You walked into Nathaniel's life, and you looked at everything I have spent years being close to, and you treated it like furniture, like a backdrop for your recovery." "I wasn't aware we were in competition," Charlotte said. "That's exactly the problem." A flatness in Victoria's voice now, a specific chill. "You have never been aware of me at all. You looked right through me every time. That is not something I'm going to accept. So you decided to end my career instead. I decided to remove you." Victoria said it with a simplicity that was more alarming than rage would have been. "You don't belong in his life. You're a damaged woman using him as a landing pad while you process a divorce, and he's too—" She stopped. "Too what?" Charlotte said. "Too attached to see it clearly." Charlotte looked at her for a long moment. "What else do you have, beyond the file breach and the photographs? What are you still holding?" Victoria smiled. It was the smile of a woman who believed she still had a card in her hand. "More than you want me to have." "Tell me what it is." "Why would I do that?" "Because," Charlotte said, "if you tell me now, We control the scope of what happens next. If I have to find out through Roland's investigation, the scope expands in directions that are going to be significantly worse for you. She paused. I'm giving you one chance to de-escalate this. That is not weakness. That is me offering you an exit from a situation you built and cannot finish. Victoria looked at her with the cold, precise attention of someone running probability. The journalist at the Tribune, Charlotte said. What did you give her? Something moved across Victoria's face. You gave her something beyond the photographs, Charlotte said. Something about the divorce proceedings. Something about the Moreau syndicate. She watched Victoria's expression. You gave her Adrian. The silence confirmed it before Victoria said a word. Charlotte felt the floor shift under her feet in a way that was different from every previous shift because this one had a different architecture. This wasn't about her divorce or her credentials or her relationship with Nathaniel. This was about Adrian Moreau and the Moreau syndicate and a journalist at a major Chicago newspaper who had been fed information by a woman with a personal vendetta and a trust fund and no particular concern for the collateral consequences. What did you give her? Charlotte said. Victoria's composure had returned. Enough. Enough to what? Enough to burn everything down, Victoria said. Including you, including him, including anyone who gets in the way. She picked up her wine glass again, composed and deliberate. You wanted the full scope? That's the full scope. I don't do half measures, Charlotte. I never have. Her eyes were steady. And that story runs Monday morning unless... The word hung in the air of Eleanor Blackwood's dining room like smoke. Charlotte did not move. Victoria had left the sentence open on purpose. The oldest negotiating technique in existence, the incomplete threat, the door left ajar to let the other person's imagination finish the work. Charlotte recognized it and refused to walk through it. She sat with her hands in her lap and her face still and waited. Unless what? She said. Victoria turned her wine glass slowly by the stem. 1 rotation, 2. Unless you leave, Chicago, the account, Nathaniel. She set the glass down. All of it. Clean. No drama. You were never here. Charlotte looked at her. She thought about the 8 weeks she had spent rebuilding from a hospital bed. She thought about the mornings she had gone to work when going to work was the only form of survival available to her. She thought about what it had cost her to sit across from Nathaniel Blackwood and accept coffee from a vending machine and allow someone to be kind to her without flinching away from it because kindness had become a thing she no longer trusted. No, she said. Victoria's expression did not change. Then Monday? Monday? Nothing. Charlotte stood. You're not going to run that story, not because I'm asking you not to, because by Monday morning, Roland Graves will have filed a formal report with the building's legal team documenting the Floor 9 breach, your credentials, and your timeline. And that report will be in the hands of the Tribune's editor-in-chief before your journalist friend can file a single word. And whatever you gave her about Adrian Moreau will be contextualized as information obtained through corporate espionage by a source facing criminal exposure. She held Victoria's eyes. You built something fragile and dressed it up to look solid. I've seen the foundation. It doesn't hold. She walked out of the dining room. Her hands were shaking by the time she reached the hallway. Not from fear, from the specific physiological cost of sitting very still while your entire nervous system is screaming. She pressed one hand flat against the hallway wall and breathed once, twice, 3 times, and then Roland Graves was at her elbow, and Nathaniel was coming down the hallway from the direction of his mother's study, and she had approximately 4 seconds before she needed to be functional again. She used them. She gave the journalist something about the syndicate, Charlotte said when Nathaniel reached her. I don't know what specifically. She said enough to burn everything down. That's her language. She looked at Roland. I need to know what she actually has before Monday. Roland already had his phone out. I'll have someone on the journalist tonight. Carefully, Nathaniel said. Always. Roland moved down the hallway. Nathaniel looked at Charlotte. Something in the quality of his attention had shifted. Not the steadiness that was constant, but there was something underneath it now, a tightness around the jaw that told her the calculation behind his eyes had reached a conclusion he didn't fully like. What aren't you telling me? She said. Nothing you need to... Nathaniel. He was quiet for a moment. Then, Victoria has been in contact with someone connected to the Moreau syndicate for approximately 3 weeks. We picked it up through a secondary flag in Roland's monitoring. I didn't tell you because I wasn't certain of the connection, and I didn't want to add to what you were already carrying. The hallway was very quiet. She's been talking to someone in Adrian's organization, Charlotte said. A peripheral connection, not Adrian directly, someone who had reason to want additional leverage in the divorce proceedings. He paused. I believe the syndicate contact gave her the material about Adrian's operations that she passed to the journalist, in exchange for the photographs and the corporate espionage setup, which benefited both of them. Charlotte closed her eyes. She opened them. So Victoria and a faction of the Moreau syndicate have been running parallel operations against me, she said, coordinating through an intermediary, neither of them fully aware of what the other is doing or how far the other is willing to go. That's what I believe. And now Victoria has told a Tribune journalist enough about syndicate operations to potentially trigger a federal investigation, which means the syndicate contact she's been working with is going to find out what she's done, and they are not going to be pleased. She watched Nathaniel's face confirm it without words. Where does that leave me? She said. He looked at her steadily. It leaves you in the middle of something that has gotten significantly larger than a divorce and a corporate dispute. That's why I'm telling you now. Because the next 24 hours are going to move fast, and I need you to understand the full geography. She was quiet for a moment. Then she picked up her coat from the hallway chair and said, Call Marcus. We need to move tonight. The drive back to the city took 40 minutes. Charlotte spent most of it on the phone with Margaret Sy, who listened to everything with the focused silence of a woman recalibrating her entire strategic map in real time. When Charlotte finished, Margaret said, If the journalist has syndicate operational detail, the moment that story breaks, the divorce proceedings become secondary. Federal investigators will freeze everything connected to Moreau pending inquiry. That includes jointly held assets. I know. It also means Adrian will know the story is coming. He will move to contain it. The way he contains things is not always legal. I know that too. Charlotte, Margaret's voice shifted into its most careful register. If there is a syndicate faction involved in building this case against you, and if Victoria Blackwood has now compromised their arrangement with the journalist contact, you may be in a position where multiple parties with significant resources and no legal constraints are managing a crisis in which you are a central variable. A pause. I need you to consider your physical safety. She had not considered it. She considered it now, sitting in the back seat of a black Audi moving through Chicago at 11 at night, and felt the cold, specific weight of understanding that she had been thinking about this as a legal and professional problem for so long that she had not fully accounted for the fact that one of the parties involved was a crime organization. She called Diane. I need you to go to your sister's tonight. What, Charlie? Just for a few days. Don't argue. Go tonight after I call you back. She hung up. She called Nathaniel. Where are we going? Somewhere that isn't your apartment and isn't mine, he said. He was in a separate car. He had taken his own vehicle from the North Shore while Charlotte took Marcus. I have a property in River North that isn't registered to me directly, acquired through a holding structure for exactly the kind of situation where I need somewhere that can't be found quickly. A pause. I want you there tonight. And tomorrow? Tomorrow we find out what Victoria gave the journalist, and then we decide what to do about it. The River North property was a floor of a converted warehouse building. Industrial bones, clean interior, the kind of space that communicated money without announcing it. Roland Graves was already there when they arrived. 2 men Charlotte didn't recognize were posted at the building's entrance and the stairwell door. She noted them and said nothing. Inside, Roland had set up a working station on the dining table, 2 laptops, printed documents, a board on the wall with photographs, and a timeline that he had built with the efficiency of someone who had spent the last 3 hours in motion. Charlotte stood at the board and read it. Victoria Blackwood. The journalist, whose name was Dana Reyes, Tribune Business Desk, 7 years on the paper. A name she didn't recognize. Syndicate Peripheral, Roland had written, with a question mark. Connected to Victoria by a dotted line. Adrian's name in a separate column, connected by another dotted line to the peripheral contact. Her own name at the center of it all, connected to everything and originating nothing, the still point around which everyone else had been moving. What's the material? She said. What did Victoria actually give Reyes? Roland pulled up a document on one of the laptops. Based on what our contact was able to establish tonight, the material includes financial routing documentation for 3 Moreau Syndicate offshore structures, account numbers, transfer histories, names of 2 shell companies used for moving money through a legitimate hospitality business. He paused. If accurate, it establishes a direct link between the syndicate's illegal revenue and a federally regulated financial institution. Bank fraud, Nathaniel said from across the room. At minimum. Roland looked at Charlotte. The question is how Victoria obtained that documentation. She doesn't have direct access to Moreau Syndicate operations. The peripheral contact gave it to her, Charlotte said, which means someone inside the syndicate's financial structure is willing to burn Adrian to apply pressure in the divorce proceedings. She thought about it. Someone who benefits if Adrian is weakened. Someone who has been waiting for an opportunity. Internal faction, Nathaniel said. Adrian has enemies inside his own organization. She had always known this the way she knew certain things about his world. As background noise she had trained herself not to hear. Someone decided my divorce was the opening. She turned away from the board. Does Adrian know? Roland looked at his phone. Unknown. She made a decision then, fast and cold, the way the best decisions get made, without ceremony. She picked up her personal phone and called Adrian. Nathaniel looked at her sharply. She held up one hand and kept her eyes on the middle distance and listened to the line ring. 1 ring. 2. He answered on the 3rd, which meant he had seen her name and decided to pick up, which meant he was either expecting her call or had been waiting for it. Charlotte. His voice was controlled but not relaxed, the voice of a man who had been awake for a while. There's a Tribune journalist named Dana Reyes, she said. She has financial documentation connected to 3 of your offshore structures, account numbers, and transfer histories. She's planning to run it Monday. Silence. Someone in your organization gave it to her, Charlotte said, through a third party connected to the divorce proceedings. You have a faction problem, Adrian, and it's been running for at least 3 weeks. More silence. Longer. Why are you telling me this? Not a question exactly. A man trying to understand the geometry of something that wasn't adding up. Because if that story runs Monday, the federal exposure doesn't just hit you. It freezes every asset connected to our joint holdings and delays my divorce proceedings by 18 months while investigators go through everything. I want my divorce finalized. I want my life back. And I cannot have either of those things if you're in the middle of a federal investigation. She paused. So I'm telling you because our interests for approximately the next 72 hours are aligned. A long pause. Who's the third party? He said. A woman named Victoria Blackwood. Nathaniel Blackwood's adopted sister. She has her own reasons, and they have nothing to do with you. She was used. Charlotte looked at Roland, who was watching her with professional assessment. She may not fully understand what she was given or what it would trigger. She thought she was lighting a fire under me. She didn't know how much accelerant was on the ground. She heard Adrian breathe. One slow exhale, the specific sound of a man reorganizing his threat matrix. I need a name, he said. The person in my organization. I don't have one. Roland Graves has a partial. I'll send you what we have. Roland Graves. He repeated the name. Blackwood's security man. Yes. Another pause. This is a strange conversation, Charlotte. I know. You're working with him. I'm working with his security division to address a corporate breach that was built to destroy my career. Yes. She kept her voice even. Are we going to discuss the nature of my professional associations, or are we going to address the fact that you have a faction leak and 72 hours before it goes public? She heard him move. The sound of a door closing. He was finding privacy. I'll handle my side. I need something from you in exchange. The silence was shorter this time. What? The counter-narrative in the divorce filing. The affair accusation. I need it withdrawn by Monday morning before the Tribune situation develops. If my name is attached to misconduct allegations when that story breaks, the connection will be assumed regardless of accuracy. She paused. I'm giving you information that is worth significantly more than a withdrawn legal filing. You know that. She heard him think. Done, he said. The line went dead. She set the phone on the table. Nathaniel was looking at her with an expression she couldn't fully read. Not disapproval, not surprise exactly. Something more complex than either. You warned him, he said. I used him, she said. There's a difference. The night moved fast after that. Roland's team worked through until 4 in the morning, establishing the chain of documentation from Victoria to Dana Reyes. They identified the syndicate peripheral contact, a man named Cass Merrill, mid-level financial coordinator for a Moreau-adjacent hospitality group, someone with access to the routing documentation and a history of quiet resentment toward the syndicate's leadership structure. Someone who had apparently decided that destabilizing Adrian through the divorce proceedings was a manageable risk. He had miscalculated. At 6 in the morning, Charlotte's phone buzzed with a message from Margaret Sy. Counter-narrative filing withdrawn as of midnight. Moreau's attorneys filed the notice with the court. We're clear on the divorce record. She showed it to Nathaniel without comment. He read it and handed the phone back. What does it cost you, he said. Calling him. Warning him. She thought about it honestly. Nothing I hadn't already paid. She looked at the table. He's going to spend the next 72 hours looking inward at his own organization. That means he's not looking at me. And whatever he finds, it will keep him occupied well past the point where he could cause me further damage in the proceedings. She paused. It's not forgiveness. It's geometry. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. You've gotten better at this. I've had a difficult few months. At 8 Saturday morning, Roland's contact at the Tribune reached Dana Reyes before she filed anything. The contact, Charlotte didn't ask who it was or how Roland had gotten there, informed the journalist that her primary source for the financial documentation was facing corporate espionage charges and that the documentation's provenance was legally compromised. The story was pulled pending editorial review. Charlotte heard this and felt something in her chest loosen incrementally. She had been awake for 26 hours. She was sitting on the couch in the River North warehouse with her shoes off and her second cup of coffee going cold on the table when Nathaniel came and sat at the other end of the couch and said, "You should sleep." In a minute. That minute has been coming for about 4 hours. She looked at him. In the gray morning light coming through the warehouse's high windows, he looked tired in a way he hadn't allowed himself to look the night before. The controlled alertness had finally settled into something more human, the jaw less set, the shoulders carrying their actual weight rather than the performance of carrying none. "Victoria's not done," she said. "No. Even with the footage, even with the filing, she's not the kind of person who stops." "I know." He looked at the window. "I've known that for a long time and I handled it badly." "What does that mean?" "It means I knew what she believed about us and I let it persist because addressing it directly was a conversation I didn't want to have. That's cowardice dressed up as consideration, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise." He looked at her. "Whatever she does next is partly the result of something I failed to prevent." Charlotte looked at him steadily. "She's not your responsibility," she said. "No, but the conditions I created are." He paused. "I don't do guilt well. I do better with action. So I'm going to address Victoria directly this weekend, and I'm going to be completely clear in a way I should have been a long time ago. And I'm going to do it with Roland in the building because I no longer trust what she might do." Charlotte nodded slowly. She thought about the board on the wall, the timeline, all the lines connecting all the names. She thought about the fact that 24 hours ago she had been sitting across a dinner table from a woman who had spent months building a machine designed to end her, and she had sat through 2 courses of it before dismantling it to its component parts, and that had cost her something she was only now beginning to calculate. She was tired, not the sleep deprivation kind of tired, deeper than that, the kind that accumulated over months and expressed itself in sudden full-body weight, the kind where you sat on a couch at 8 in the morning and your hands stopped wanting to hold anything. She set down the coffee cup. She looked at Nathaniel. "Tell me something that has nothing to do with any of this," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then, "When I was in Europe, I lived in a city where the best coffee in the world was served in a 20-seat cafe that had been run by the same family for 60 years. No menu. You sat down and the owner brought you what he thought you needed. I went every morning for 2 years, and he never once brought me the same thing twice." She listened. "I thought about it a lot," he said. "What it would be like to know someone well enough to know what they need on any given morning, to have paid enough attention over long enough time to just know." He paused. I think about it when I'm in situations like last night, when knowing what someone needs is the difference between things going one way or the other. Charlotte looked at him. You knew I needed the footage seen before Roland filed, she said. Yes. You knew I needed to talk to Victoria myself before any formal action. Yes. You knew I needed to be the one to call Adrian. Yes? Quietly. She was quiet for a moment. How long? She said. College? He didn't look away. Since the second year, you were presenting a campaign concept in Professor Aldrich's seminar. You got a question from someone in the back row that was designed to be dismissive, and you took it apart in about 90 seconds without raising your voice and then thanked him for it and meant it. That was the moment. He paused. I was going to say something that year. And then you met Adrian. She absorbed this. Outside, Chicago was waking up. The sound of it reaching even this high, the particular urban frequency of a city resuming its own momentum regardless of what had happened inside it overnight. You stayed, she said. I went to Europe when I understood it wasn't going to change. That's the honest version. He looked at his hands. I came back because my father died and the company needed me. And then I was in a parking structure across from a hospital, and I saw you come out, and I saw what happened after, and I made a decision. What decision? That I was done with patience as a substitute for presence. The room was very still. Charlotte was still sitting with that when her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. Unknown number. But the first 3 digits of the number were a prefix she recognized. Syndicate adjacent. A routing number Adrian's organization used for communications that weren't meant to be traced. She answered, Ms. Whitmore, a voice she didn't know, male, flat, the specific flatness of professional menace. You made a call last night that has created a significant inconvenience for several parties. Her blood went cold. Cass Merrill has been addressed, the voice continued. That's been handled internally, but the Blackwood woman is a problem that remains unresolved. She has material that cannot be allowed to reach publication regardless of the Tribune's current position. The organization's interest is in permanent resolution. I don't work for your organization, Charlotte said. No, but you are currently located at 441 North Halsted, 4th floor, with Nathaniel Blackwood and 2 of his security personnel. A pause. We've known your location since approximately 2 a.m. We've been waiting to see how the morning developed before making contact. Another pause, deliberately measured. We have a mutual interest in the Blackwood woman being contained. We believe you have the access to accomplish that. We would like you to bring her to a location of our choosing by 9 p.m. tonight. Charlotte looked at Nathaniel. He had read her face and was already moving toward Roland's workspace. And if I don't, she said, then the situation becomes significantly more complicated for everyone in that building. The voice paused one final time. 9 p.m., Ms. Whitmore. We'll be in touch with the location. Do not involve police. You know what happens when police get involved in syndicate matters, and so does Mr. Blackwood. The line clicked dead. Charlotte set the phone on the couch beside her. The morning light was still coming through the warehouse windows, clean and gray and indifferent. She looked at Nathaniel. He had Roland on the phone. He was already moving. His face had the specific quality of a man who has been preparing for a version of this moment for a long time and has arrived at it with all the dread and none of the surprise. They know where we are, Charlotte said. I heard. They want Victoria delivered to them by 9 tonight. I heard that too. She stood up from the couch. Her hands weren't shaking. That surprised her. After everything. The sleepless night, the calls, the board on the wall, the geometry of a situation that had expanded well past anything she had planned for. Her hands were completely still. What do we do? She said. Nathaniel ended his call with Roland. He looked at her with the full weight of everything he had not been willing to say out loud since 2 a.m. We do the thing neither of us wants to do, he said. Which is? We call Victoria. We tell her the truth about who she's been working with and what they're capable of and what is coming for her if she doesn't move in the next 6 hours. He picked up his phone. And then we use whatever she does next to end this. All of it. Tonight. Charlotte was already pulling on her coat. Make the call, she said. Roland appeared in the doorway. His face was the face of a man who had just confirmed something he had been hoping not to confirm. "We have a problem," he said. "Victoria left the North Shore property this morning at 6 a.m. Her phone is off. Her car's GPS has been disabled." He looked between them. "She's gone." The word sat in the warehouse air for exactly 1 second before everyone in the room started moving. Roland was already back on his phone, 2 steps into the hallway, his voice dropping into the clipped cadence of a man issuing instructions to people who didn't need them, explained. Charlotte pulled her coat fully on and picked up her phone and ran a fast inventory of what she knew. Victoria had left the North Shore at 6 a.m., 4 hours ago. Her phone was dark. Her car's GPS had been manually disabled, which was not something a panicked woman did by accident. That was preparation. Victoria had known last night that something had shifted and she had moved before dawn with a plan already in place. The question was where. Nathaniel was at Roland's board, studying the timeline with his hands flat on the table, and Charlotte crossed the room and stood beside him and looked at it with the same focused attention and tried to think the way Victoria thought. Not reactively. Victoria was not reactive. Everything she had done over the past months had been planned and sequenced and timed. Even now, even with the footage exposed and the Tribune story pulled and the syndicate's interest suddenly and lethally redirected toward her, she would not be running. Running was for people who had run out of plays. Victoria still believed she had a play. "The journalist," Charlotte said. Nathaniel looked at her. "Dana Reyes. The Tribune story was pulled pending editorial review, not killed permanently. If Victoria goes directly to Reyes with the financial documentation in person, bypasses the editorial hesitation, puts the physical documents in her hands, the story runs regardless of the source's legal exposure." She looked at Nathaniel. "Victoria doesn't care about the corporate espionage charge anymore. She's past caring about that. She cares about burning everything down before the syndicate reaches her. If she can get that story published in the next few hours, the federal exposure triggers, Adrian's organization goes into crisis containment, and in all that chaos, she becomes a secondary concern." Nathaniel held her eyes. "She's going to Reyes. Right now. This morning." He turned to the hallway. "Roland." Roland appeared in the doorway. "Dana Reyes, Tribune business desk. Find her current location. Now." Roland was gone again. Charlotte stood at the board and looked at Victoria's photograph. A professional headshot from a Blackwood Holdings function. The composed and deliberate attractiveness. The particular quality of a woman who had spent her whole life performing competence so thoroughly, she had eventually stopped being able to distinguish it from the real thing. She understood Victoria in a way she wished she didn't. Not the specific pathology of it, the fixation, the campaign, the willingness to use people as instruments, but the underneath of it. The specific grief of wanting to belong to something that was never going to claim you. Charlotte had spent a decade belonging to a man who had been running a separate version of his life the entire time. Victoria had spent years belonging to a family structure that had never fully converted her from guest to member. Different wounds, different expressions, same original damage. She did not forgive her for any of it, but she understood the root of it, and understanding the root meant she knew exactly how cornered Victoria was going to feel when they found her. Roland came back in 4 minutes. "Reyes lives in Wicker Park. She's home on weekends. Victoria's car was picked up on a traffic camera on Milwaukee Avenue 12 minutes ago. She's heading there." Nathaniel was already at the door. Charlotte followed without being asked. Marcus had the car at the building entrance in under 2 minutes. They moved through Saturday morning Chicago with the particular urgency of people who could not afford to announce their urgency. No sirens, no recklessness, just the aggressive efficiency of a driver who knew the city's arterial logic and used it. Charlotte sat in the back seat and kept her breathing even, and her hands still in her lap, and felt the specific pressure of a situation that had narrowed to a single point. They arrived on Dana Reyes' block 11 minutes after leaving River North. Victoria's disabled GPS car was parked 2 doors down from a brownstone walk-up. "She's already inside," Nathaniel said. Charlotte looked at the building. 3rd floor, light on, visible through the front window. "I'm going up," she said. "Charlotte, if you send Roland, it's a confrontation. If you go, it's a confrontation. If I go alone, it's a conversation." She looked at him steadily. "I can end this without it becoming something worse, but I need to do it alone." His jaw was set. "You have 3 minutes. After 3 minutes, I'm coming up." She was out of the car before he finished the sentence. The building's front door was unlocked, an old walk-up with a buzzed entry that someone had propped with a folded takeout menu. She took the stairs to the third floor two at a time, not running, moving with the focused pace of someone who knew exactly where they were going and had decided that pace was its own kind of authority. Apartment 3C. She knocked. 30 seconds passed. The door opened 4 inches on a chain. Donna Reyes, late 30s, sharp-faced, the alert wariness of a journalist who had learned that unannounced visitors on weekends were either very good stories or very bad ones, looked through the gap. "Who are you?" "My name is Charlotte Whitmore. I'm the person Victoria Blackwood has been trying to destroy for the past 3 months. I need 2 minutes." A pause. The door closed. The chain came off. The door opened. Donna Reyes was still in weekend clothes, jeans, a worn university sweatshirt, and she had the look of a woman whose Saturday morning had already become something she hadn't planned for. Charlotte entered. The apartment was small and lived in and covered in the particular organized chaos of someone whose work existed in every room. Papers on the coffee table, 2 laptops open on the kitchen counter, and Victoria Blackwood standing at the far end of the small living room in her coat, a manila envelope in one hand, looking at Charlotte with the expression of a woman who had just watched her last play intercepted at the line. The 3 of them occupied the room in a triangle of competing interests. Dana Reyes looked between them with the professional assessment of someone who understood she was inside a story that was considerably larger than the one she'd been pitched. "Ms. Reyes," Charlotte said without looking away from Victoria, "whatever is in that envelope was obtained through a criminal breach of a corporate network. The person who gave it to Victoria obtained it as part of a coordinated campaign to manipulate both a divorce proceeding and a corporate espionage framing. Publishing it exposes your paper to significant legal liability regardless of the information's accuracy." She paused. "I'm not asking you to kill a story. I'm asking you to give me 24 hours to provide documentation that will make this story substantially larger and substantially more defensible than what you currently have." Dana Reyes looked at Victoria. Victoria's jaw was tight. "Don't listen to her. She's trying to—" "Victoria." Charlotte's voice was flat and final. Not raised, not cruel. The tone of a woman who has reached the end of her available patience with great precision. "The syndicate contact you are working with has been addressed internally. You know what that means? You know what kind of organization you are dealing with and what internally addressed means in their language." She held Victoria's eyes. "The people you are using to build this are not going to protect you. They are going to minimize their exposure, and you are a loose end. The only thing standing between you and that outcome right now is the fact that Nathaniel is 2 floors below this apartment, and Roland Graves has been on the phone with 2 attorneys since 6 this morning who are prepared to file a formal cooperation agreement on your behalf with the Federal Financial Crimes Unit if you walk out of here with me right now." The room was extremely quiet. Victoria stared at her. "Why?" she said. It came out smaller than she intended. The composure was still there on the surface, but underneath it something had given way and they both knew it. "Why would you do that? Why would he do that?" "Because he's not interested in your destruction." Charlotte looked at her steadily. "He never was. That was always your version of what he wanted, not his." She paused. "And because if the syndicate decides you're a liability before you're inside a cooperation agreement, the problem stops being legal." Victoria's hand with the envelope lowered by half an inch. It was not agreement. It was not surrender. It was the specific micro-movement of a person whose certainty has just developed a fracture line. Dana Reyes made the decision for all of them. "I'll need that documentation," she said to Charlotte. "The larger story, 24 hours. She looked at Victoria. "I'll hold what I have." She took the manila envelope from Victoria's unresisting hand. Victoria looked at Charlotte. Something moved through her expression, not remorse, not yet, possibly not ever, but a more primitive and more honest thing, the look of a person who has been running very fast for a very long time and has just run out of ground. "Let's go," Charlotte said. They walked out together. On the sidewalk, Nathaniel was standing beside Marcus, with his hands in his coat pockets, and the particular quality of stillness that meant he had been holding himself in place through an act of will for the past 3 minutes. When he saw them come through the door, both of them, together, No sirens, no wreckage. Something in his face changed in a way he didn't try to control. He looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at him. "I'll deal with the attorneys," she said. Her voice was very flat. "I don't want to talk right now." "Okay," he said. She got into Roland's car without another word. Charlotte stood on the sidewalk and breathed the cold February air and felt the specific exhaustion of a fight that was over. Not cleanly, not cheaply, but over. Done. The thing that had been building for months, from a hospital parking lot in November, through a kitchen at midnight, through a recovery room and a gas station lot, and a Gold Coast lobby, and a North Shore dinner table in a warehouse in River North, had reached its final point of pressure and had not detonated. Nathaniel came and stood beside her. He didn't say anything for a moment. "She's going to be okay," Charlotte said. "If she cooperates, she'll be okay." "I know. You need to talk to her when she's ready." She looked at him. "Not to fix it, just to be clear, the way you should have been clear 2 years ago." "I know that too." He paused. "Are you all right?" She thought about the question honestly. All right was a complicated word for the state she was in. She was standing. She was functional. She had not broken or folded at any point during the preceding 12 hours, despite substantial invitation to do both. Whether that constituted all right in any meaningful sense, she couldn't be certain. "I will be," she said. He nodded. They stood there on the sidewalk for another moment, two people who had been through a great deal in a short time, and then Marcus opened the car door, and they got in and went back to rebuild what was left of the day. The weeks that followed moved differently. Not easily. Nothing about any of it was easy. But with a different quality of motion. Forward motion, the kind that carried actual weight because it was headed somewhere real instead of somewhere imagined. Victoria entered a formal cooperation agreement with federal financial crimes investigators on the second day. Roland's attorneys managed the process with the efficiency of people who had done it before. The corporate espionage charges were reduced in exchange for full cooperation regarding the syndicate's financial routing documentation. Victoria was not exonerated. She was not destroyed. She existed in the complicated territory between those two outcomes, which was, Charlotte thought, probably where she had always been headed. Eleanor Blackwood called Charlotte 3 days after the Wicker Park morning. Charlotte answered because she had always found that unanswered things accumulated interest. "I misjudged you," Eleanor said. It came out with the particular directness of a woman for whom honesty was easier than apology. "When Nathaniel first mentioned your name, I made assumptions based on incomplete information. I would like to correct that." "You don't need to." "I do need to. I was wrong. And I would like to say so, and I would like to meet you properly, without a dinner party's worth of subtext." A pause. "If you're willing." Charlotte thought about it. "Coffee," she said. "Not dinner, not yet." "Coffee," Eleanor agreed. They met the following Thursday at a cafe in the Gold Coast that Eleanor had apparently been going to for 30 years. She was sharp and direct and had the particular quality of a woman who had survived a great deal and wore it without display. And Charlotte found herself across a small table with two Americanos between them, understanding precisely where Nathaniel had learned to pay attention. Eleanor looked at her for a long moment near the end of the hour and said, "He waited a very long time." Charlotte held her eyes. "I know." "Don't make him wait much longer." Not a demand, a statement of observed fact. Charlotte drove home with that sitting in her chest. The divorce was finalized on a Thursday afternoon in March. Margaret Sy called her with the news at 4:15. Charlotte was at her desk in the middle of a campaign presentation review, and she excused herself and went to the small conference room at the end of the hall and sat at the empty table and listened to Margaret tell her it was done. All of it, the asset structure, the prenuptial validation, the counter-narrative withdrawn, the proceedings closed. She thanked Margaret. She sat in the empty conference room for about 5 minutes. She thought about a night 6 years ago when she had married Adrian Moreau in a Chicago venue with 200 guests and believed it was the beginning of a life she had earned. She thought about everything she had believed that was wrong and everything she had not believed that was true, and the specific education that came from the gap between those two things. She did not feel triumph. She did not feel grief in its old form. She felt the clean, somewhat exhausting feeling of a weight that had been present so long she had forgotten it was there finally being set down. She went back to her desk and finished the presentation review. She called Nathaniel at 7 that evening. "It's done," she said. A pause. "How do you feel?" "Tired, clear." She thought about it. "Like someone opened a window." "Good." His voice was careful in the way it was careful when he was managing something he didn't want to mishandle. "Can I take you to dinner?" "Yes," she said. "You can take me to dinner." It was not a milestone or a ceremony. It was dinner, a small Italian place in the West Loop that he had been going to for 2 years. Family run, no reservation needed. The kind of restaurant that existed because someone had decided their food was worth making correctly every single night, without requiring an audience to validate that decision. They ate pasta and drank wine and talked about things that had nothing to do with Victoria or the syndicate or legal proceedings. And Charlotte found herself somewhere around the second glass of wine, doing something she hadn't done in so long that the muscles for it felt unfamiliar. She laughed. Not the social kind, the real kind, from something he said that was genuinely funny in a dry and specific way. And she heard the sound of it and recognized it as hers and was surprised. Nathaniel looked at her with the expression of a man who had been hoping to hear exactly that. He did not say anything. He picked up his wine. They walked after dinner through the West Loop in the cold March air. No destination. The city around them doing what cities do. Indifferent and alive and full of the particular beauty of a place that has no interest in your personal history. Charlotte had always loved Chicago at night. She had stayed through everything partly because she was not willing to let the city go. It had witnessed her worst year, and she intended to make it witness the rest of her life as evidence that the worst year was not the whole story. She had told Nathaniel as much once, in the warehouse, in the middle of everything, and he had understood it immediately without requiring explanation. That was a thing she was still getting used to, the absence of translation. Spending 10 years explaining yourself to someone who had never quite been listening, and then suddenly being around a person for whom the explanation was unnecessary, was a profound and slightly disorienting adjustment. They stopped at a corner. She turned to look at him. "I'm going to need time," she said. "Not infinite time, but real time. To be certain I'm not just reaching for something because everything else broke." He looked at her steadily. "I know. I'm telling you because you deserve the honest version. I've always preferred it." He paused. "Charlotte, I've been waiting since I was 22 years old, and I have gotten considerably better at it. I'm not asking you for anything tonight. I'm telling you that I'm here and I'm not going anywhere, and that is a fact, not a negotiating position." He looked at her with the directness that was simply his baseline mode of existing. "That's all." She held his eyes for a long moment. Then she leaned up and kissed him. Brief. Deliberate. The kind of kiss that doesn't need to be anything other than what it is. She pulled back. He looked at her. "Okay," he said. She smiled. It felt like the most natural thing she had done in a year. Adrienne Moreau left Chicago in April. She heard about it from Diane, who heard it from someone in their old social circle, who mentioned it the way people mention things they expect to land harder than they do. He had sold the Gold Coast townhouse and transferred his remaining Chicago operations to a deputy and relocated, somewhere south, someone said, though no one was certain where, and Charlotte did not spend energy trying to find out. He did not contact her. She had not expected him to. But 2 weeks before she heard about his departure, a package arrived at her office. No return address. Inside was a single document, notarized, formal, signed by Adrian and witnessed by his attorney. A full written acknowledgement that the events at Vanessa Hart's residence in November had occurred as Charlotte had described them to her legal team. No admission of specific criminal liability, but something more than what a man like Adrienne Moreau was generally willing to put on paper. He had also included a handwritten note. 4 sentences. She read it twice and then put it in the desk drawer and closed it. She would decide later whether to keep it. What the note said, she kept to herself. It was the one thing in this entire year that belonged only to her. Vanessa Hart had her baby in January. A girl, as it turned out, not a boy as everyone had assumed. The paternity question resolved itself through a DNA process initiated by the baby's actual father, a man with no connection to the Moreau syndicate, who had apparently been in Vanessa's life before and during the period of the affair, and who, unlike Adrian, had no empire to protect and no reason to dispute what the test confirmed. Charlotte heard about this through Margaret Sy, mentioned in a footnote of a legal correspondence related to the finalized divorce. She did not feel what she expected to feel. She felt something quieter, not vindication. She had moved past the territory where other people's failures would have felt like her victories. Something more like the distant, slightly melancholy recognition that the people who had burned her world down had mostly managed to burn their own in the process, without her assistance, and that there was no satisfaction in that. There was only the fact of it. She sent nothing to Vanessa. There was nothing to send. The communications contract with Blackwood Holdings launched in May. It was, by any measurable standard, the most significant account her division had ever managed, and she ran it with the focused precision of someone who understood that her professional credibility was the thing she had protected through everything, and she intended to keep protecting it. The work was good. The team she built around it was excellent. Nathaniel was a difficult client in the best sense, demanding, specific, unwilling to accept work that wasn't exactly what was needed, which made the work better and made her better at it. They kept the professional and the personal in separate registers. Not always perfectly, but with intention. Charlotte moved out of Diane's apartment and into a place of her own. A top-floor two-bedroom in Lincoln Square, all windows and original hardwood, close enough to her office that she could walk on good days. She spent 2 weeks furnishing it in a way that had nothing to do with anyone's taste but hers. She bought exactly the kind of things she had always wanted and had silently negotiated away over 10 years of living in a space that was nominally shared but had never truly been equal. She put nothing on the walls for a month. Then one Sunday she went to a gallery in Pilsen on her own and bought a large abstract canvas in deep blues and greens that she could not explain and did not try to, and hung it in the living room where she could see it from the kitchen, and the apartment felt after that like somewhere she lived. Diane came for dinner that week and looked at the canvas and said, "That's very you." "I know," Charlotte said. "I didn't know you had taste. I always had taste. I just spent a decade applying it to someone else's life." Diane opened the wine. They ate dinner and talked until midnight, and at the end of the night, after Diane had gone and the apartment was quiet, Charlotte stood at her kitchen window and looked out at Lincoln Square below. The Saturday night foot traffic, the restaurant lights, the particular aliveness of a neighborhood going about the business of existing, and felt something settle in her chest that was not happiness exactly, but was the precondition for it. The solid, quiet sense of being in the right place, of having arrived somewhere she had built herself through loss and damage and considerable unasked-for education, and being able to stand in it without apology. She thought about the hospital in November, the ultrasound photo on the kitchen counter, the things she had lost before she had fully understood she was allowed to have it. She let herself think about it completely, which was something she had not done in a while. She had been managing it, containing it, filing it in the appropriate interior drawer and closing it when the work required her attention. But she let herself think about it now, in the quiet of her own apartment, standing at her own window, and she felt the weight of it without flinching away from it, because she had decided some time ago that the things that had been taken from her deserved to be fully acknowledged before they were put to rest. A child. That was what it had been. A small curved shape in gray static with the strongest heartbeat the technician had ever heard. She pressed her palm flat against the cold glass of the window and held it there for a moment. Then she took her hand back. She washed the dinner dishes. She went to bed. In the morning, she woke up before 6 and made coffee and sat at her kitchen table with her laptop and started working. And the day began the way days began now, with intention, with clarity, with the specific velocity of a person who had stopped waiting for the life she'd planned and started building the one she actually had. 2 months later, on a Saturday afternoon in July, she and Nathaniel were walking through Millennium Park. No destination, no occasion, the easy, unhurried pace of two people who had stopped needing their time together to justify itself. He had brought coffee from a place 3 blocks over, and they walked with the cups and the summer air and the city in full July expression around them, the lake visible to the east, the skyline behind them, the afternoon open. He took her hand at some point. She let him. They walked like that for a while. At a certain point he said, without preamble, "I want to ask you something." "Okay." He was quiet for a moment, the particular quality of quiet that meant he was being precise about language. "I'm not in a hurry. I've told you that, and I mean it. But I want you to know that what I want, when you're ready, when it's right, is everything. Not proximity, not arrangement, everything." She walked with that for a few steps. The lake was very blue in the July light. Someone's kid was running along the path ahead of them, arms out, doing the things small children do when they've discovered that forward motion is available to them and have not yet found a reason to stop. "I know," she said. "That's not a yes." "No." She looked at him. "But it's also not a no. And coming from me right now, you should understand that's significant." He looked at her. Something in his face opened in a way she had only seen a few times. The unguarded version. The one that had nothing to do with competence or control or the weight of a life spent in boardrooms and difficult rooms. Just the plain face of a person who has wanted something for a very long time and has received a piece of news he will spend a long time sitting with. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she agreed. They kept walking. The coffee was good. The city was alive and indifferent and full of people moving through their own private architectures of loss and recovery and the slow, difficult work of becoming who they intended to be. Charlotte walked through the middle of it with her hand in someone else's hand and the summer light on her face and the specific, unshowy, hard-won quality of a woman who had survived everything she had survived and had decided, against all available evidence and at considerable personal cost, to believe again anyway. Not in people, not in promises, in herself. In the next morning, in the fact that the day she was walking through was real and hers and still going. That was enough. For now, it was more than enough.